And before we start, I'd like to begin acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which we are connecting in from today. And I would also like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. As I said, my name is Martin Schlegel. I'm the chair of the Australian Sports Technologies Network, and I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to our webinar today with Own Your Health Collective. And these webinars are part of our series to bring discussions and thought leadership to our sector. And for those of you who know the ASTN and particular my colleagues Amy Crossland and Hayley Priestnall have been working specifically in our program to support women founders in sports tech. And we, I personally have seen some of the discrepancies or gaps that occur and still exist in our sector. When our daughter Sophie actually approached me whilst I was coaching her soccer team and always asked me, Dad, when you're back in the US, can you bring me another pair of boots? Because the ones that I can get in Australia don't fit. And when I first thought, well, this might be just due to the limit of availability in the local retail space. And I obviously then traveled overseas and also had the opportunity to speak with some of the global brands about their approach to female apparel, female footwear. It became entirely clear to me that there has been a notion in the industry to effectively, when it comes to footwear, I was actually finding out that the existing companies took either the largest kid size or the smallest men's size and then branded those or marketed those as female apparel, female footwear. And obviously, for those of you that are familiar with that, this approach of shrink it and pink it is no longer really applicable. But it not only extends from sports apparel, footwear to um, it also manifests itself in the lack of the digital offerings. And one of the examples that I recently, well, now probably a year ago, heard about was that even digital algorithms, when they make suggestions to a female athlete, might have an inherent bias built into them because if they are not based on actual female athlete data, then how good are they in making actually suggestions for a female athlete to monitor the performance and actually take advice out of this? So all in all, I've seen it firsthand. As a sector, we have a number of things that we have to address. And so this webinar, I'm really pleased to have a number of really good experts that are going to share their insights on the topic and shine a light on what is actually happening and what still needs to be done. So with that, thank you very much for everyone to joining us. This webinar is made possible also um, through the contribution that the various state governments extend to the ASTN, the Victorian government, the Queensland government, the government of Western Australia. And so with that, I turn over to Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin, for that introduction and also for giving us an insight into your personal experience with your daughter as well. And I just want to extend a thanks to the ASTN team also for partnering with us to bring this event to you today. As Martin said, my name is Natalie Moore and I have the pleasure of moderating this discussion today. Now, this event really does mark the first of many vital conversations that we need to be having because understanding menstrual cycles isn't just about sport, it's about education, performance, and well-being in every aspect of life. For too long, we've lacked the vocabulary, let alone the deeper understanding of how menstrual cycles impact our bodies, minds, and performance. And so today is about building that literacy. And this really is the first step in this discussion. You may hear new terms, gain fresh insights, and start connecting dots you've never considered before. And so we encourage you to engage with curiosity and explore what this knowledge could mean for you, your teams, and beyond. So with that, let's introduce our panelists, leaders in this space who are here to share their expertise, challenge outdated narratives, and help us reshape the way we think about menstrual cycles and health. So let me introduce you first of all to Lisa Saunders, who is my business partner at Own Your Health Collective. Now, Lisa is an accredited women's health and lifestyle coach, facilitator, and workplace performance and wellbeing consultant with a mission to help women embrace their physiology and unlock their full potential. Lisa focuses on gender-specific wellbeing strategies that enhance confidence, energy, and overall health. At Own Your Health, we believe that when individuals are healthy across their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions, they can live with lasting vitality and happiness, thriving at every stage of life. Now, our work extends to empowering women's health as a catalyst for peak performance, resilience, and growth, unlocking the strength and confidence needed to excel in sport, leadership, and all aspects of life. And by providing tailored holistic health solutions, Lisa ensures women are equipped to thrive and perform at their best, whether in the workplace, on the field, or in daily life. Now, Hannah Dower. Hannah is currently undertaking her PhD with the Western Bulldogs AFLW team and Victoria University, investigating the influence of the menstrual cycle and hormonal contraception on performance in field team sport athletes. She has over 8 years' experience working with females in sport, has held roles as high performance manager, strength and conditioning coach, and rehabilitation coordination. Alongside her career in elite and sub-elite sport, she has an accredited exercise physiologist for 6 years, including roles in the tertiary education sector, where she was responsible for running a student-led clinic. Hannah is also a proud contributor to the Live Life Whole project, an evidence-based project designed to empower young women with the tools they need to nourish and nurture their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So you can see that we are in good stead with wonderful expertise and experience. So I do want to direct this first question to Hannah, and it does flow on from Martin's introduction. Now, we know technology plays a massive role in modern sports, from tracking performance metrics to monitoring recovery. But there's an ongoing issue, and Martin alluded to this. Most of these data sets and technologies have historically been developed with men in mind, leaving a significant gap when it comes to understanding women's unique needs and physiological differences. Hannah, we'd love your context. Why do you think there's still such a gap when it comes to incorporating female-specific data into sports technology, and how can we start to bridge that divide?
Well, firstly, thanks for including me into your panel today. I'm really honored and kind of excited to be here and share, I guess, our insights across me, Lisa, and Nat. I guess we're all aware that sport has been a male-dominated space for quite a while now, which means that the research into the requirements of what female athletes might need is still catching up with I guess, the boom of female sports that we've had in the last little while. So one thing that I think people probably might not understand or might not, I guess, recognize is that women's sport and female sport, it's sometimes played really differently to the men's game. So we can't often just take the approach that we've had for the equivalent men's sport and then put it into the women's sport. So in my background in AFLW, at least, our rules are different. Our ball size is different. The actual game itself is a little bit different, and the same with cricket. The boundaries in shorter than a men's game. So determining what female athletes might need in their sport is one thing, and that's going to take a little bit of time of these sports existing to then do the research in them to figure out what we might need. And then to kind of play devil's advocate, what we might not need to change, or what are the things that are really working in the performance recovery rehab space that we don't need to change and is best practice and will work really well for female athletes. By no means do I think that we need to change everything, but the game side of things. But then obviously the reason why we're all here today, or what my background is in, is that female athletes' bodies are completely different to men's bodies, and men's bodies are different and female bodies are different. But we have marked things that are going to make the way that we play sport a little bit different, or the way that female athletes play their sport a little bit differently. So we have bigger breasts, we have different hormones, we have different shaped hips. There's just a lot of different things that are going to change the way that we might need to approach how we approach people and female athletes in sport. So yeah, one of the main things obviously in my background and what we're here to talk about today is the fact that females will have large hormonal fluctuations, and what we label as a menstrual cycle, and the potential differences that this kind of great thing that happens to us and allows us to bear kids if that's something that we want, but definitely impacts or may impact what we how we approach female athletes in sports. It's really, really different to men, and we're just catching up with the research that's going on in the female space to hopefully give us a bit of a roadmap for what we might be finding.
Yeah, such a powerful insight and really great reflection. And that's why we love this conversation, particularly as an initial conversation, because there was so much goodness that you shared there around the differences in the game and the differences in our physiology and our body. And, in full transparency, majority of us probably haven't even considered that before. And because we are still in the early stages of women in sport, as well as we've spoken about outside of this event too. So this really does lead into my next question for Lisa around the menstrual cycle. Now, Lisa, you and I in our business, the menstrual cycle is something we hear about all the time, but many of us don't actually understand its full scope or impact. And this is where I want attendees or those listening to really be curious and think about, you're starting to build your literacy here. It is more than just a monthly occurrence. It's a cycle with distinct phases that can influence everything from energy levels to physical performance. Lise, can you give us an overview of the menstrual cycle and what's happening at each stage?
I sure can. And apologies for the voice, everyone. I'm coming off the back of a cold, so let's hope we don't have a coughing fit as I talk through here. So you're right on point there, Nat. It's more than a reproductive rhythm. It's definitely, I liken it to a bit of a monthly blueprint that's going to affect a woman's energy and mood, their mental focus, their physical performance. So typically, and I say typically, around 28 days, a woman's cycle can be anywhere, from 25 to 32. It's very individual, but it moves through 4 key phases, which are guided by shifts in our hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And the work that we do, Nat, we think of it like the seasons and find it very much easier to remember through the coaching that we do, because each phase really does have a distinct energy and opportunity. So if we look at the first phase, it's the menstrual phase, which we liken to winter, days 1 to 5. This is when we know the bleeding occurs and our hormone levels are very much at their lowest. Energy is naturally lower, making it an ideal time to rest and reflect and recover, both physically and mentally. And from a sport perspective, it could be a time where we prioritise recovery or low intensity movement. Now, while objective performance may not change around this time drastically for all of us, many women perceive this phase as a bit more fatiguing for them, which is, a good enough reason to be adjusting what we're doing. And I would say here, this is a time to really respect the signals that our body is telling us. From there, we go into the follicular phase, which is around those days 6 to 13, and we liken that to our spring. And here our hormone estrogen begins to rise. It brings increased energy, creativity, and motivation. And it's a really great time for goal setting. High intensity training starts to come on and new beginnings. So from a sport perspective, it's a prime time for strength, agility, and endurance work. And research suggests that estrogen, as the estrogen rises, energy availability and performance potential may improve here, making this quite an ideal time to challenge oneself through this particular phase. And then from days 14 to 17, we have the ovulatory phase, or as we call it, the summer phase. And here, estrogen peaks, and there's a short surge in testosterone, bringing about confidence, communication skills, and a real outward energy. And it's a really great and powerful time for collaboration and performance. So in sport, this could be viewed as a high performance window. But with rising estrogen, there can become some increased joint laxity or looseness, particularly in the ligaments. So there is a heightened injury risk that we need to be aware of as well. So it's around balancing that intensity with movement quality and injury prevention strategies. And then from that short phase of summer, we enter the autumn, or the luteal phase, which is around that day 18 to 28. And here the hormone progesterone really dominates, and energy can dip towards the end of this phase. So women may feel more inward, sensitive, or analytical, and it's a really perfect time for deep work, completing tasks, or reevaluating what's working and possibly what's not. So from a sport focus, it's a great time to focus on strength, endurance, and possibly adjust for slower recovery or even some lower motivation. And some studies show that there's a reduced anabolic capacity here. So being smart about training volume and leaning into recovery strategies is important. And I will say that this is very individual and very much a foundational framework, and every woman is different. But why this matters is that when we work with our cycle rather than against it, we're actually unlocking a much more intuitive and intelligent way to manage our energy, our performance, and our recovery. And for athletes in particular, this awareness can help reduce injury risk, improve outcomes, and just help them build a healthier relationship with their body. And that's super important for all women.
Amazing, Lise. Thank you for that. And, there's a lot of information in there, and I think you've condensed it beautifully and given really the main points across those 4 phases. Hannah, just when it comes to athletes, we know that the menstrual cycle can present both challenges and opportunities, whether it's training schedules, performance optimization, or recovery strategies. But understanding the cycle plays a crucial role. What should we consider when approaching the menstrual cycle in the context of sport?
I'll try and keep my answers succinct to what Lisa did, but given that I'm due to write 80,000 to 90,000 words on this topic, I'll try and keep it really small. But there's a lot that we should and could consider when we do approach the menstrual cycle in the context of sport. I think that's such a big question at the moment, and there is such a huge uptick in research into this area, which is fabulous to see. I think one thing to register right off the bat is that the way to measure the menstrual cycle is really complex, and that's sometimes quite difficult in a sporting environment. That whilst we do have, I guess, those distinct phases, verifying ovulation and verifying a change to a luteal phase, and those things take blood tests or urine tests or salivary tests, so things that are typically pretty invasive for anyone, but pretty invasive in a sport environment. So that's one thing off the bat to consider, is if you want to go into detail into tracking the menstrual cycle and the ins and outs of what an athlete in front of you is presenting from a health point of view, and are they bleeding regularly? Are they experiencing ovulation? Are they moving into their luteal phase? Those things need to be researched or done with someone that's going to understand the repercussions of that, and then what to do with that. So do you have a medical team and people on board that are going to be able to synthesize that information and be able to keep that really protected for the athlete, particularly for me in somewhere like a team sport environment at least. And that kind of leads in, I guess, to understanding the ethical side of approaching the menstrual cycle in sport. And by no means that I have any answer, and I don't think that anyone truly does have like a huge answer to this at the moment. It's a really ongoing discussion and research, and yeah, some really healthy debates and discussions on how we can do this ethically and how we can support the athlete, given that it is, you know, potentially sensitive medical information, particularly when we get into the realm of endometriosis or any kind of irregularities or conditions that female athletes and general females might present with. Excuse me. How do we approach that in sport? Is there a blueprint that we can do that for? And I think these are really questions that are still being ongoing, and there is no straightforward answer. But when we consider that stuff, that kind of sits in, I guess, my health bucket or my screening bucket, which should definitely be involved with medical personnel and understanding, again, can you support the athlete if you do find things or you do talk to them about that? Now, I guess moving into the performance space or understanding where the research is at with the performance is like navigating a bit of a minefield at the moment, because there is such a growing field of research out there, but we've really only like decided how we should measure these phases accurately in the last like 5 or 10 years. So the high quality research is still really catching up to establishing the basics of the menstrual cycle, which I'm sure both of you can attest to for sure. And yeah, understanding the performance space is really, really complex, at least in my field, in the team sport environment, and pretty much every sport I would hazard a guess that performance is not linear, you know, like it's really hard to say that this phase of the menstrual cycle is going to give this performance outcome, because our performance is influenced by so many different things. But I think understanding the symptoms commonly reporting or the symptoms that people are reporting is a really important way to go about approaching the menstrual cycle in sport, and trying to link some things together for athletes and being able to educate them on why they might be experiencing these things, when they're experiencing them. As Lisa said, the blueprint of the phases is a really nice way to look at it, but there's people that might not experience any of that or might experience something completely different. And that's the approach that I think we need to take in sport. It needs to be bespoke and helpful for the person that you've got in front of you, and this holistic kind of picture of what's going on for them and why that might be occurring. And that takes resources and funding and qualified people, and I guess educated people that can help support that. So how you approach the menstrual cycle, at least I think in my view, is going to be really dependent on what you have available to you. And if you have really limited resources, or you don't have the people that can support you in that area, maybe for now it is just education, and it's being able to provide these athletes with a welcome space that they can talk about it if they want to, or outsourcing your medical care to someone else so that you can refer them if they have issues they want to bring up. So what we have in AFLW is going to be really different to what we have in local sport and in sub-elite sectors. So I think just understanding the context that people are in is going to really dictate what you're able to do, and how you approach it. But I know you guys love an analogy, but for me, it's about opening the door and letting the athlete walk through if they want to. So opening the door to the conversation about menstrual cycles, and do they want to engage with you about this? And most of the time I get a yes, and I get a really positive interaction with athletes, but there is some athletes that they're not willing to talk to you about that yet, and I'm really passionate about giving them the space to manage that on their own if they want to. And I certainly don't think that in at least the sporting sector that it needs to be dictated that this is what we must do and how we do it. I think listening to the athlete voice is really, really important for me, at least.
Yeah, that's such a good answer. And I think you succinctly provided your whole 80,000 word PhD in 6 minutes. But you really did touch on some great points there, that it starts with that education. And there is a lot of stigma and a lot of taboo and a lot of shame when it comes to the menstrual cycle. And that really is ingrained from generation to generation. And it's not at anyone's fault. We've just never viewed the menstrual cycle in this way before, or connected to it in this capacity. And so you're absolutely right that a lot of athletes and girls and women don't necessarily feel comfortable to even say the word period or menstrual cycle, particularly in a sporting context. But we need to be able to provide that safe space and environment where, for those curious athletes, if they want to start to learn about it, that's the first step that they might take. So, Lise, how can we better educate athletes to understand their cycle and embrace it in whatever capacity that they feel they are ready to at the time?
I love, Hannah, what you said around opening the door. So having an open door element for them to come to you is really so amazingly wonderful. But they may start back from it, and you also mentioned they may not want to talk about it yet. So these are some of the things, I suppose, that we can take it back to that individual point of view for women, young girls, young women who not sure how they want to discuss it yet. And one of the things that I think is really powerful is cycle tracking. So, just getting out a pen and paper and just really encouraging athletes to track their cycle, not just when they bleed, but how they feel, how they perform from cycle to cycle, how they're recovering. Are they identifying any patterns? It's all about helping athletes train with their body and not against it. So I really think that cycle tracking can be quite powerful. And obviously that leads on to that seasonal framework that we spoke about. It is, it's a very generalized point of view that I spoke about, but, just being able to identify if, in their winter, do they need to prioritize rest and recovery more than what they normally do? Or are they seeing in their spring that their strength, their intensity is ramping up? And is there energy peaking through summer? That's where that cycle tracking really comes in to see if there are any patterns there. And I do agree, there are some women that don't exactly experience these type of different changes through their cycle, but that's where cycle tracking is really powerful, just to see if there are some patterns coming through. And obviously, we can be looking at tailored training programs, and there's an option there to obviously look at the training intensity to match into those hormonal fluctuations that they might see that's coming through the cycle tracking. And this can help them look at improving their performance outcomes, reducing injury risk, and helping prevent burnout. And the other thing we can be doing is nutritional support. Now, we often tailor nutrition and sleep to our training regime. So adjusting the nutrition to support their body through each of their phases is really important. So, for example, they might look at increasing their iron during menstruation and focus on recovery support during the luteal phase. So that's another option. And then there's that coaching and team education that we can be looking at. So in essence, true education really includes the whole team, not just the individual when we're talking about sport. And so coaching and support staff, making them part of the conversation, making cycle talk really normal and not sensitive and not taboo. They're just some of the things that come to mind around how we can, actually help them make the most of their cycle for that performance and recovery.
Great insights there, Lise, and a really good starting point for individual athletes in particular to become familiar with their cycle and their body as well. Now, this is a really good question because we do hear many myths and misconceptions when it comes to menstruation and menstrual cycles, and in particular in sport, and some of which can hold athletes back or make them feel misunderstood. I'd love to go to each of you, and perhaps we'll start with Hannah, particularly through your research and your work at AFLW. What is one or two of the most common myths you've encountered, and how has that impacted athletes, if any?
Yeah, great question. I think it's probably coming back to that sort of linear direct approach that a hormone is going to impact performance. I think it's just so multifactorial and so complex in this space that I think if that happened, then we would see really clear outcomes in the research that we're doing, that everyone experiences a performance drop at a certain time, and that's just like not what we're seeing at all. It's really murky, and it's really messy, and it's really complex. That the outcomes that we're seeing are really hard to draw conclusions on sometimes, because there is so many things impacting female athletes. And again, that's not to say that they don't have necessarily symptoms that are going to cause them to feel a certain way. But yeah, I think just drawing that really clear direct link is not so much a myth. I think it might occur we might find it happens in research in the next 10 years, but it's difficult at the moment to draw that single line between those two things. And then I think the second thing for me would probably be that, and I'm sure we might get to this a little bit later, but that when an athlete takes hormonal contraception, or if they take hormonal contraception, then they don't really need to be considered, that they're sort of kind of in this space of, well, I take the pill, or they take this kind of hormonal contraception, and therefore they don't experience anything else. So they're okay over there. And it definitely hasn't been the experience from what I found in my research at all, definitely. And I don't know what the stats are in Australia, but there's 70 different kinds of pills in America alone. And that's just an oral contraceptive pill, let alone an IUD, or an implant, or other common forms of contraception that female athletes choose to use. So I think in my research, that's been one of the really interesting things to find, is that hormonal contraception is a commonplace in the athletic space. It's a commonplace in females in general, but definitely in the athletic space, that we really need to consider that as well. And what these athletes are experiencing. And you know, some of the athletes that I tracked through my research had really similar kind of profiles to almost a regular cycling athlete. So they were using an IUD, but they still experienced a regular bleed, and some of them still actually ovulated, which was a really interesting finding. So did they experience things that go along with ovulation? Did they have symptoms that occurred with that? So yeah, I think just discarding hormonal contraception is like, well, it doesn't really bother me, and encouraging people that still use contraception to track for a little bit if they're keen to, and find out how those symptoms might be linked in, and then engaging with medical professionals if things aren't quite adding up, or things aren't, isn't experiencing what they thought they were going to on this contraception. I think is a really yeah, important thing that I found with my research, at least, that yeah, I don't want to say that menstrual cycle education or female athlete health education and research in that area is just not applicable to hormonal contraceptive users. I think they're yeah, they need to be considered really holistically as well.
Great myths and misconceptions there. Thanks, Hannah. And I think we'll get Lisa's answer, and then I would love to come back to the hormonal contraception discussion as well. Lise, what are we hearing around myths and misconceptions, or have you got one that you could share?
Yeah, I think for me, and that's fascinating reply, Hannah. I'm keen to hear more about that later on. I think the thing for me is the taboo-ness of this topic. What we seem to be avoiding discussions around menstrual health, and that's really impacting young girls, young women across the board. And this really does provide, or it creates a real huge barrier to athlete well-being. And the silence and not talking about it can be the most damaging. If you've got an environment where you can remove the stigma and encourage athletes to get the support they need when they might be feeling a bit off, or just to talk about it, from tracking their cycle to speaking up when it feels off, that can be really powerful. And it should be just the norm, not the taboo, not the exception. So I think that taboo topic is, avoiding discussion. We need to be openly talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, today we're a byproduct of generations before us where we didn't talk about it. But we are the first generation that will. And, I look at my 10-year-old and the education and the conversations I have with her and the conversations she has with her friends. This is a topic that they will talk about, and they will expect that there is that awareness and that support. Absolutely, it's coming. Thank you for that. Hannah, I do want to go back to the hormonal contraception conversation, and you touched on it a little bit. Is there anything else that you can provide in terms of how that hormonal contraception fits into the discussion around the menstrual cycle and for athletes? And what has been, whether it's preliminary findings or just, initial conversations with athletes, is there anything there that you could share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, I think again it's a really complex space, and like I mentioned with the so many different pill types in in the States. Um, Athletes use a variety. Sorry, I hope I haven't got your cold. I yeah, there's a ton of different varieties of hormonal contraception, and there's oral contraceptive pills, there's hormonal IUDs, into uterine devices for those I guess not acquainted. There's implants like the rod that sit in your arm. There's vaginal rings. There's all kinds of different types of contraception, and I think when I look back to when I was younger, the pill was sort of the only option that I could have, and it wasn't many options on the table for me. And one of the great researchers in this space, Dr. Jen Gunter, she says that deciding to go on hormonal contraception should be like, here are your options, and this is why I think this might be a good option for you. Let's trial it and see how it goes, and working with the patient or um the athlete to figure out a way that's working really well for them, instead of this is what you have and you're stuck with it. So I think one thing is the technology, at least, or the research in the health space has really grown in the last 10, 20, 50 years, that we have a lot of different options now that are becoming more less invasive and hopefully less side effects for people. But yeah, like that was one of the things that I found with my research, that people that use an IUD, there was a subset of athletes that would use an IUD and didn't experience any kind of really symptoms or any kind of bleeding or at all, and didn't really report any um, any issues with it, or any type of symptoms that were seemingly perceptively to them related to their cycle or their contraception. And we tracked them over 3 to 6 months. So but yeah, on the flip side, some of the athletes that used an IUD experienced regular 28-day bleeds, which was a really interesting finding for me, at least, and sparked a really good conversation with that athlete when they were like, oh, I bleed really randomly. And when we tracked it, I said, no, you bleed every 28 days, pretty much, bang on. And yeah, like I found that they ovulated. And then on the flip side, there's athletes that experience spotting and all a whole range of different experiences with hormonal contraception. And if you think of, well, if there's one type and then different dosages and then everyone's different, then the experience that they're going to have is just going to be completely variable, which is a really important factor in the applied-based setting where I am, at least, that this is the type of athletes that we have, and incorporating that into the medical team and what they're doing with it. So I just think it's really important, and it's sometimes, I think, a bit disregarded, or we only see the pill as the only option, when a lot of athletes are choosing to use IUDs and implants and what we call set and forget contraceptive pieces, because I have to remember to take a pill every day, but it doesn't mean that they might not be the perfect option for them. Or I think the research in this space is very, very, very minimal research in IUDs, for example. But what they might mean for athletes, I think, was an interesting finding outside of what I expected to find with my research, which is sometimes always the best one sometimes. So I just think it's an important narrative to add to the conversation of cycles in sport, for sure.
Mm. Absolutely. And it really overlaps that variability, doesn't it? Because, every woman's menstrual cycle is unique to that individual woman. And then you've got the variance of if they're taking hormonal contraception, and that's another layer of variability that we really do need to be aware of. And because everyone's going to experience different symptoms, and even women might experience a certain symptom on one particular contraceptive, and then they change to something else and have another range of symptoms as well. And I think you're right that it's really about the medical team and the personnel that the sporting club has got that can really support individuals around this, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Beautiful. Lise, I want to come back now to what you spoke about around taboo. And I do just want to touch on, how can we start building that culture of openness and support, and not just within sporting clubs, but really within a community context as well, because this is a topic and a piece of education that every single one of us do need. So how do we start to build that culture of openness and support?
Yeah, it's the silence around menstrual health is damaging, continues to be damaging while we're not talking about it. So when we treat it as a taboo, it, as I mentioned before, creates some shame. It stops athletes from speaking up, stops them from tracking their cycles or just getting the support that they need. So we need to start with normalizing the conversation. And this is right across the board with all the work that we do. It's not just a separate women's issue, but it needs to be seen as a standard part of how we support performance and general overall well-being. And so what does that look like? So from the top, leaders, this is in a workplace or a sporting club or even in a family setting, right? So the leader in that sort of leader, it sets the tone. So that's where the coach, the captain, or the physio, whoever that is, they model openness. It signals safety for the people that follow them, saying that in a very generalized format. But safety is really important here. Safe to be able to put your hand up, speak up, approach someone if something's not right or something's off. And simple language shifts also, talking about the cycle in terms of seasons does make it more relatable. And we know that with the work that we've done around this, women love being able to refer to it through the seasons. It makes them, it's very, they're able to understand what's going on with their body when they liken it to the seasons. So it takes the fear out of it, makes it more relatable. And then, of course, education needs to be for everyone, not just female athletes or females in general. We need to include everyone in the conversation in the education, because when everyone understands or the whole team understands what's going on, support becomes much easier and that stigma fades. And I will say here, as I have said over and over again over the years that we've been doing this work, we weren't talking about mental health, years ago. And now look at where we are with that, because the conversation, the education, the acceptance and the support is there now. So it's so much easier to be able to speak about when, one's mental health is being compromised. So we can't whisper anymore. We've got to stop the whispering and just create a culture that's being proactive and being very collaborative and enthusiastic in relation to taking on the discussion around what we're experiencing as women.
Beautifully shared, Lise. Thank you. Now, my final question is to both of you, and really continuing on with that flavour. How can sporting organisations and corporates and community organisations really take the lead in championing menstrual health? And Hannah, we'll jump to you with that question.
Oh, it's another big one. I actually think you guys can probably answer this better than I can, given the work that you do. But I'll give it a crack, and then you can dive in if you want to. But yeah, I really resonated with what you said about it's everyone's, like we need to educate everyone. And I think I work in sport, and that's traditionally been a male dominated space, but with the female sport that I work in, I'm often surrounded by many women, which is incredible. So sometimes I feel like I'm often protected from what's out there in the corporate setting, because the space that I'm in is I always joke that we have the best bathrooms at the Bulldogs, because it's just full of hair straighteners and products and like the really nice body wash and stuff in our bathrooms, and I'm protected from that in a way. But that doesn't mean that as an organization on the whole that we can't, I guess, do a little bit more. And I think, yeah, that is educating people and educating males in this space as well to understand what might be happening with the females in the workplace, what might be happening with females in sport. And I think that's something that I've seen, having worked in this space now for 8 years and walking in the door in day one of AFLW pretty much to now, that I've seen just this massive shift in openness and willingness for particularly male coaches and male support staff to want to learn. But there is still that little bit of that barrier. Sometimes they don't know how to approach it with a female athlete, so they don't. And that's something that we'd really love to be able to shift and give them the tools so that they feel comfortable in saying, do you know where you're at in your cycle today? Or could that be impacting what you're doing? Mm-hmm. So giving like male coaches the tools to feel really confident in being able to do that, because most of the time, athletes are quite open and willing to talk about that. Sometimes they're not. The research does suggest that there's still a little bit of a disconnect between coaches and staff around the menstrual cycle. But from a sports organisation point of view, it's just, I think you guys can add more in terms of the corporate sense, but recognizing that it affects women in the workplace and in corporate, no matter where you are in your lifespan, whether you're young and just started out as an internship or whether you're going through menopause or perimenopause. That's the stuff that really needs to be taken into consideration. I think that, again, I don't have the answer. I just think the starting the conversations piece and being willing and open to learn and hear people's stories. I think through storytelling, sometimes you can get the real magic of how it's affecting someone.
Yeah, beautifully said. And Lise, would love your take on that question as well.
Yeah, building on from Hannah, leadership, and I mentioned it previously, leadership does set the tone here in the sense of where to launch from. When sport organisations, just organisations in general, take menstrual health seriously, it's not an afterthought, but it's part of performance and well-being. It really does change everything, and it just sends a really collaborative tone down the line. So one of the things they can think about is implementing smart policy, so making menstrual health part of training and competition planning. It's not something that athletes have to quietly manage back in the background. It's open and we're ready to help you do that. And then secondly, they can invest in education and research. So obviously working with someone like us, inviting experts, funding studies, training coaches and staff, so they actually understand, which speaks to your point, Hannah, they understand how cycle impacts performance and all the other things, that go along with it. And then thirdly, I think providing access to the right support. So, following on a little bit from what I've said, but having those health professionals like physios, GPs, performance staff, coaches who are trained in menstrual and hormonal health on staff, and they make those resources available to athletes. There's other things that affect our performance, be it men or women's sporting club, that we make the resources available. Well, why not just make sure that we make that menstrual health resources as part of that toolkit? And, it just takes away the stigma, the taboo, and normalizes the resource and the conversation for our athletes. So they actually feel seen, they feel heard, they feel supported. And gosh, I wonder how our performance looks on the field when all of that happens.
Yeah, really great answers, both of you. And just as you were both talking, I came back to the concept around really helping women be advocates for their health and their well-being, and advocates for what they need to be able to do the sport that they love, or the exercise, or the recreation activity, or the work that they do. It really is opening up that conversation. Now we have come to a close of our formal questions, and so I do want to invite any of our attendees to ask us some questions. And so you're welcome to use the chat function there. If you can type your question into the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can over the next sort of 10-15 minutes. Hannah, just in closing around this conversation, it would be remiss of us if we didn't ask you about your PhD. How much longer have you got with the work that you're doing? And, is this a document or research that, everybody could have access to eventually down the track to learn around your findings?
You pulled the one rule that you're not supposed to do with PhD students and ask them how long they've got left or how
Sorry.
it's going. No, it's so fun. So I'm 2 years in and have 18 months to go if all goes according to plan. But yeah, investigated a couple of studies last year. Nationwide with AFLW and AFLW athletes, and then also some in-house projects at the Bulldogs, and then I'll continue that work throughout this year. Obviously in the research space, we're always aiming to publish our work so that it can be read and seen by everyone. So when that time comes and I'm able to put that stuff out there. But there's also just a lot of research coming out aside from mine. It's really tremendous work in this area, and every day you can read some really great research in this space. So I'm certainly not alone in that, but yeah, there's been quite limited work in the AFLW space, so hopefully we can we can share some of those findings throughout the year for sure.
Yeah, amazing. And I did put you on the spot there with your PhD, and I'm sure we've now all noted down when it's due, and we're going to hold you to account. No, just kidding. But I think definitely what you've touched on is that we very much are in the infancy with this topic and this conversation and this support. But every conversation really does go a long way to starting to normalize and bring a level of acceptance and really trying to drop down some of those silos and that stigma that we have around menstrual cycles. And I know we connected, I think, over 12 months ago, and loved that you were doing this research as part of your PhD and continuing the conversation. So thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Now, this is from Samantha, who's a sports dietitian working within an NSO and as part of National Institute Network. Keen to hear any advice you may have for better tracking and considering athlete menstrual cycles in athlete prescription intervention as a health professional servicing 30 plus athletes across sport. Samantha goes on to say, it goes without saying each athlete has their own tailored training program, IPP, nutritional plan, but the obvious step is taking this further to consider and incorporate menstrual cycle phases and capabilities. How can practitioners proactively, efficiently and effectively within what's often limited servicing hours take this step to better individualise programs to support athlete wellbeing and performance? And maybe Hannah, this is one for you to reflect on your experience with Western Bulldogs AFLW.
Yeah, best question. And that was essentially what kicked off my entire PhD, because I wanted to know how we could do this, and I wanted to understand an ethical, considered, individualized way of doing this, given that, yeah, in the space that I'm in, at least, that was purely my argument, that we individualize really well around nutritional advice or injury and recovery and those kinds of things. So I don't have I don't have an answer for you. And I think even by June 2026, which is when I'm supposed to finish, I don't know if I have an answer for you anyway. But I think just like I said, when I talked about the resources that you have, it's like, what are you actually available to do? And sometimes going all in on an idea when it's not completely, I guess, thought out or considered or feasible is probably not the best option either. So I think it's really like taking the time to consider that maybe we're not at the point where we can individualize around the menstrual cycle yet in team-based sport, and that's okay, but we are taking steps to get in that direction. But given how slow research moves and how difficult it's been over the last 10 to 20 years to get this to the forefront, I don't have the answer, but that is literally what I'm trying to figure out, and it's not a question to be answered, but maybe different approaches to try for sure. So I don't really answer your question, but I think that like there's people out there doing this stuff, and there's research out there investigating how we can feasibly track the menstrual cycle in sport. There is papers on this for sure.
Yeah. No, look, a good answer, and I think it really highlights again the infancy and the very beginning that we were at with this topic. But coming back to that resource discussion, what can you feasibly, or what resources can you provide or give access to help start that conversation? And we often find through our work it's that curiosity. How do you start to just plant that seed around the curiosity and start to introduce vocabulary? Because this is, follicular, luteal, menstruation, menstrual cycle, these could all be new words that we've never actually said or considered before in our vocabulary. And I know that might sound crazy being women, but absolutely, we just have never had the vocabulary before. I do want to jump to the next question from Emily. And so Emily talks about, promoting menstrual cycles. There is that concept around blaming it for shortcomings, or that, we're blaming it for irregularities and failings, and really adding to that stigma. Do you have any tips on how to change the discourse on this? And Lise, I might hand to you on that question, and Hannah can chime in afterwards. But yeah, how do we change the discourse on this?
Yeah, it's a powerful question. A few things come to mind. I think the language matters here. We need to turn it around. We need to reframe how we're talking about the cycle to instead from blaming to actually understanding. So it could be that, I've had a bad session because I'm in my luteal phase. Well, can we reframe that and go, well, actually, I'm feeling a bit fatigued today. I'm in my luteal phase, so I'm going to adjust my strategy. And what does that look like? So it becomes awareness, not an excuse. So language is very much important here. And I think the element again of reframing and tipping it on its side or reversing it is just celebrating, what the gains are in every phase. We tend to naturally just concentrate on the negative side of things. So look at what's actually working in each of the phases, but also also seeing what's not working for them in their phases. So that I think coming back to the cycle tracking is really everything, whether, you're on hormonal contraception, your comments were really interesting, Hannah, around that. So I do feel like everyone has their own cycle, their own phases, and their own symptoms, whatever. So I think when you can actually understand what's going on each month and doing that, it becomes a lot more easier to turn it into a curiosity rather than a criticism. So that's probably the two things I would suggest and answer.
Yeah, nice. Hannah, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with the curiosity piece, and I think this is something that I've definitely found in my research and my conversations with athletes, and not just recently, but over the last 5 to 6 years, that I've spoken to athletes working in clinical private practice before that have read stuff online and said, well, am I supposed to change my entire training? But I feel just fine across, like I just don't feel that like I'm that affected. Like I feel kind of good all the time. And I'm like, great, like good for you. That's amazing. Like let's harness that and just let's maybe keep tracking for a little bit longer and see if anything changes or if anything pops up we can. But like how great is that? I 100% agree. And then I think also the flip side of that is I've seen what women can do when they are experiencing these things, and I just think it's incredible. Like that's one of the fundamental things that I just keep coming back to um when I'm deep dark in analyzing stats or research. But yeah, it is celebrating sometimes what women have been able to do with everything that they do have to experience. That yeah, I think sometimes that it is blamed for everything, but I definitely echo what Lisa said, that we don't really know what's potentially impacting what unless we're understanding the tracking side of things. So there's a variety of different problems that can be blamed for injuries and other stuff that have nothing to do with the menstrual cycle at all. But we don't know that unless we understand what's happening for that person and get that medical input to understand what's going on. So in terms of the discourse, I guess, or the conversations, I think it's adding those little pieces in here and there, that like understanding that people might feel really good, although again, that storytelling that not everyone experiences negative menstrual cycle symptoms and not everyone experiences them at certain times. So, but if they do, then let's support them as much as we can.
Yeah, beautifully said. And one of the things that we love when we talk about the menstrual cycle and educating is it really gives you permission to have a sense of self-kindness towards you as well. When you, particularly if you are in those moments where you are feeling quite negative about your body or feeling like your body is letting you down, just really trying to flip that and have some self-kindness. And if I can share a personal experience, so I'm a keen marathon runner. I'm definitely not an elite athlete, but as a 43-year-old woman who is starting perimenopause, in my luteal phase, I've got increased body temperature. And in Melbourne, when we had those heightened humid days, I was going out for a long run, I think about 15K, and I was really struggling because I could feel the impact of the phase that I was in together with the environment around me. And so typically I years ago, I would have said, what are you doing, you crazy woman? Just keep running and push against it. But actually what I did is I stopped and I turned around and I ran home, because I just knew that in that moment that wasn't that type of, I didn't need to push myself to try and get to that distance that I wanted to get to. And so now I'm very conscious of that, through my continuing training, that I'm just aware of, what I'm feeling, and if I'm in that phase, and maybe tweaking my longer runs, or doing longer runs at different times. So just a non-elite athlete experience, but just highlighting how those changes really do impact how we feel. And it's all very much about the mindset, and just taking it on as information. One thing we love with the menstrual cycle is that it's information to us, and we often refer to it as our health report card, our inner stress management system, our inner mentor rather than our inner critic. And so what is our body trying to tell us through our menstrual cycle? Just
Can I
finally,
just say one thing too? I think it's really important that women, no matter their age, have the confidence to be able to speak up around how they're feeling. Because sometimes I think we're worried about what other people are going to think. And I think that if we can march forward and have more confidence in actually saying, no, this is how I feel at this point in time, that's really powerful. I don't think we're doing that enough. No, across the board, not just in sport, but just across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. We've got one final question here, and I know we've got, say, about 5 minutes before we do wrap up. What would you recommend to young athletes to get to know their cycles? And is there a particular app that we'd recommend?
Mm.
Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, I know there's lots of apps out there, but I 100% of the time will say just grab a journal, make some notes on your phone with some dates, and just start really simply. And I know we're all time poor, but it's such a powerful way then to be able to go back, or I'm a bit of a spreadsheet queen, so I'll make some dates and make a table up, and put some of my symptoms and how I'm feeling. And it's really powerful being able to see that at a month's glance from one month to another. And then you can definitely go to an app. There are a lot of apps out there. A Clue is one of the ones that comes to mind. Nat, do you want to help me out here? Some other apps that you know of?
There's Flow. I use one called Stardust, but not necessarily great for young athletes. And when you talk about young athletes, if you're talking about teenagers or pre-teens as well, I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and I probably in the first instance won't get her to use an app per se, but really find a crafty way to help her manage her, just understand her cycle. Also, when it comes to young athletes as well, it's really important, particularly when they get their first period, or menarche as it is known. It takes a couple of years for their cycle to become regular. So there will be lots of ebbs and flows, and potentially lots of gaps between each period as well. But what we do find in the research and the study that we've done, that the earlier we provide the education, the greater the experience, and the greater the opportunity to really, I guess, provide that positive and that curious mindset as well. So, Hannah, did you have anything quickly to add to that?
Yeah, I think the apps are definitely out there, and they're certainly not something that I personally recommend to people for a variety of different reasons. One of them is that you don't necessarily know where or who has access to that data with third parties that the apps that you put your medical information into. Now, full transparency, like I've used my Garmin app for the last 10 years, but I understand the risks that are involved with that, and I've kind of made that informed decision. But particularly for young preteens or teens that I know they're online all the time, and I know they're probably doing far worse things, but it's not something that I recommend that people do or go down that path. That's one of the reasons why. Two, the information that they give you is entirely inaccurate and false, which is really disappointing. But you are in this phase, therefore you must do this. That you read. Like there's been so many times where I've looked at my Garmin app and it's like, you need to eat this today, and I'm like, based off what? So I think particularly like I'd be strong in this stance, I guess, for really young people, is that's potentially the workplace that you could probably send them, because they'll think that they have to do all of these things instead of encourage them. Like I've actually gone back to pen and paper, to be honest, because I was even though I could synthesize the information, I didn't read the things that they were giving me. I just blocked it out. It's annoyed me too much to the point where I'm like, I think I'm just going to go back to my Google Calendar or a pen and paper, to be honest. And exactly what Nat said, it's going to take them 5 or 6 years, potentially 5 or 6 years for them to get a regular cycle anyway. It's really important to track during that time. But if they're inputting an app, and these apps have a fail rate of like 70% at predicting ovulation, so they're just not great at anything outside of a 28-day cycle. So if they're experiencing probably something far less and far great for at least the couple of years that they have their first period, they're going to compare themselves to what they're seeing in this algorithm that's just not accurate for them. Yeah. So probably the only firm thing that I have about apps. I'm very passionate about the ethical side of data and where it goes and who has access to it. So but yeah, for young people, be interested to see what creative things you do, Nat, because I'm sure encouraging. But like, there's fun diaries out there that you can make.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's ways to get around it that, yeah, I think is more important for sure. And then they can be really clear on what they're actually experiencing.
Yeah, beautifully said, and we share all those sentiments as well. And I think the last thing we need to do is provide more of a comparison mentality as well for young girls around their menstrual cycle through these apps as well. So before I do hand back to Martin, I just want to say a really big thank you to you, Hannah, for coming in to share your wonderful insight through your PhD and your passion for menstrual cycles in sport and supporting women's health as well. And of course, to Lisa, thank you so much for your incredible expertise and insights around the menstrual cycle. We collectively just love being able to provide this education. And as I said before, every conversation, every mutter of the word menstrual cycle or menopause or period really does go a long way to breaking down those that taboo and that stigma. And we can only hope that this is a conversation that is normalized as years and years go on. But again, thank you to ASTN and Hayley and Amy and Martin, and I'll hand back to you, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie, and thank you also from my side, Lisa and Anna, for sharing these insights. And one thing that I take away, Natalie, you were talking about that there's an education piece that you are providing to, let's say, the women athletes. But I take away there's also equally a need to educate the men that interact with the women athletes, be it as a coach or even as a parent, because some parents can be very pushy or from the sidelines. And I think what you shared just re-emphasized that the discussion and the conversation about this topic is so important to then also support the athlete in whatever ways they want to be supported. Because on the one side, not every, in particular, I think this applies to grassroots sport, not every athlete wants to be ultra competitive. There's also the social aspect that we need to understand of people coming together with which sport does so well. So thank you for sharing your insights. Um, as we said earlier, this webinar, as all of our others, has been recorded. I invite everyone to visit our website once it's up to review, interact with Natalie, Lisa, and Hannah even after the webinar, and have a look at some of the resources that our website at www.astn.com.au offers, and contact Hayley Priestnell if you want to take up a membership. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.